Are you truly in control of your thoughts, or are you merely a spectator in your own mind? In a world of distractions, the ability to focus seems increasingly rare, and yet, William James believed that the mastery of attention is the very foundation of our personal freedom. Imagine your consciousness not as a still pool, but as a stream fluid, restless and selective. This stream does not flow equally in all directions. It chooses. And that choice, James tells us, is where your agency resides. If you've ever wondered why you can't stick to a task, or why your mind slips away in moments of challenge or boredom, this video will challenge you not with quick tips, but with a radical reorientation of how you understand focus itself. From the principles of psychology to the will to believe, James developed an understanding of attention that goes far beyond mental tricks. For him, attention was an ethical act, a spiritual practice, and an existential wager. He argued that what we attend to becomes our reality, not metaphorically, but ontologically. To focus is to affirm existence, to neglect is to allow parts of the world and of the self to vanish. This video will not offer escape. It will offer a confrontation. You will see that attention is not just about productivity. It is about the kind of life you are willing to fight for. And in the end, as James insisted, you will discover that the will to attend may be the most profound expression of who you are. The room is silent, yet alive. Not because of any sound, but because of what is happening inside you. A decision is being made moment by moment, millisecond by millisecond. You are choosing what to notice and what to ignore. And in that act of choosing, William James would say, you are composing the very fabric of your experience. James began his account of attention with a startling clarity. Everyone knows what attention is. And yet, he also revealed that few of us grasp its implications. It is not just the spotlight of the mind, it is the engine of consciousness itself. To attend is to create hierarchy out of chaos, to declare one thing more important than another. In that instant, the infinite becomes finite. The world is filtered, carved, and made meaningful. You might think focus is about effort. And yes, there is effort involved, sometimes a strenuous wrestling with distraction, fatigue, or fear. But James pointed to something deeper. Attention is also about interest. We attend to what matters to us, what calls us, what resonates. And if we find ourselves unable to focus, the question is not only psychological, it is philosophical. What has lost its value for us? What part of the world has become dim because we have ceased to care? He was not naive about the difficulty. In the principles of psychology, James recognized that the will often fails. Volitional effort is effort of attention, he wrote. But he also insisted that effort can be trained, strengthened, directed. The mind is not a passive container. It is a sculptor. And the chisel is attention. Consider the habit of allowing your thoughts to wander every ping, every buzz, every impulse followed without question. James warned that the consequences are not minor. Over time, the inattentive life becomes a scattered self. We become porous, not open. Fragmented, not plural. The unity of consciousness, always tenuous, begins to dissolve. My experience is what I agree to attend to, he wrote. What I do not attend to does not exist for me. Those are not poetic words. They are ontological declarations. To practice attention, then, is not to deny the world, but to select the world. To say, this I will keep before me. It is a form of spiritual courage, an affirmation that something is worth our time, our gaze, our inner silence. And this is why, for James, attention becomes inseparable from moral effort. It is not simply a question of what you are looking at, but of who you are becoming by the way you look. There is a subtle danger in our time. We believe that control over attention can be outsourced through apps, systems, productivity hacks. But James would caution against this displacement. For him, attention is not a tool. It is a muscle of the soul. It grows by deliberate strain. It deepens by repeated choice. And perhaps more disturbingly, it shrinks through neglect. If you have ever experienced the strange pain of drifting through a task, present but not present, James would diagnose it not as a failure of discipline, but as a failure of meaning. You cannot attend without some implicit belief that what you are attending to is real, significant, worthy. This is why the will to believe and the will to attend are, in James's philosophy, siblings. Both are leaps. Both are ethical bets. And so, we arrive at a paradox. You must choose to attend before you are convinced it's worth it. You must act as if what you are focusing on matters, even when you are unsure. This is not self-deception. It is an act of faith. And it is this act, repeated and renewed, that builds the possibility of a focused life. If anything in this resonates, if you felt the weight of your own scattered attention, this is the invitation. Begin not by waiting for clarity, but by choosing what to attend to. Begin not with certainty, but with the will to look. And if you're here, still reading, still present with this unfolding argument, consider subscribing. Not out of obligation, but as a gesture of your attention, an acknowledgement that something in this stream is worth returning to. Imagine a man sitting at a desk, papers strewn around him, the ticking of a clock loud in the stillness. He has a decision to make. He must focus. Yet the more he demands of himself, the more his mind rebels, jumping to memories, fantasies, distractions. This inner war, James would argue, is not rare. It is the defining battle of modern consciousness. William James placed attention not only at the heart of psychology, but at the crossroads of freedom. In the Principles of Psychology, he dissected attention as both a selective function and a volitional act. He described how the stream of consciousness is not a smooth flow, but an interrupted course, a succession of choices about what will dominate the field of awareness. Each choice reveals what the self values, whether consciously or not. The notion that attention is under voluntary control is both empowering and haunting. James never romanticized the self as an omnipotent commander. Rather, he portrayed the will as fragile, its success dependent on repetition, practice, and belief. Attention wavers, it breaks, but it can be re-anchored if we understand what moves it. At the center of this mechanism is what James called ideomotor action. Thoughts are not inert. Every idea has a tendency to pass into action unless inhibited. And what determines which ideas become action? Attention. To focus on a thought is to give it life. To dwell is to fertilize. He wrote, "The essential achievement of the will is to attend to a difficult object and hold it fast before the mind." This is not metaphor, it is method. Attention is not only cognitive, it is deeply effective. James understood that interest precedes focus. We are pulled by what excites us, by what carries emotional weight. This is why attention cannot be separated from values nor from character. A society that floods the senses with stimuli also fragments the soul. It becomes harder to discern what truly calls us. James's vision offers no shortcuts. He challenged his readers to develop what he called the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention. This, he claimed, was the very root of judgment, character, and will. To practice it is to resist drift, not once, but again and again, as an ethical discipline, not to impress others, not to conform, but because the quality of one's life depends on what one notices. In his lectures on Talks to Teachers, James made the argument even more practical. He described attention as the door to habit formation. If we want to change ourselves, we must learn to interrupt automaticity. Every habit begins in a moment of focused will. And every transformation is carried on by sustaining that focus until a new pathway is carved. This is the quiet heroism James described, the ability to care enough to notice and to return one's attention when it drifts. There is no dramatic flair here, no external applause. The theater is internal. The stakes are invisible. But the consequences are existential. Picture again the man at the desk. His thoughts have strayed, but now he remembers. He recalls the task, the importance, the reason he began. He breathes. He brings his mind back. In that small act, he becomes someone else. Not because the task changed, but because his relationship to it did. James believed that this return, this recentering, is not just a skill but a virtue. It is a form of self-respect. A declaration that something matters enough to resist the pull of the trivial. And if we fail, if we forget, it does not mean we are broken. It means we are human, but we can try again, we can look again. We can choose again. That choice, that fragile and fierce act of attention, is what keeps the self from dissolving into noise. A child stares at a flame, mesmerized. The flicker commands his gaze completely, without effort. Later in life, this same person sits in a lecture, struggling to hear a single word. What has changed? For William James, the difference lies not in the capacity of the mind, but in its direction, its voluntary alignment with meaning. Attention, he taught, is not merely a natural faculty. It is a cultivated devotion. The psychology James developed does not reduce humans to reactive mechanisms. On the contrary, it elevates choice to a metaphysical principle. The power to attend to, direct the mind deliberately toward something and to keep it there, is not only a mental action, but a moral one. It signals the birth of responsibility. As he sighed, the will to believe is the will to act on a live hypothesis. To focus is to affirm. And in affirming, we change. Focus, then, is not a brute force. It is a form of love. Not sentimental love, but love as sustained regard. Love as the refusal to abandon what is difficult or unclear. Love as attention over time. James warned of the automatic sweetheart, the mechanized self who responds only to loudness, novelty, or ease. This self is at the mercy of what he called the law of association. Thoughts are not freely chosen. They are dictated by prior linkages, but attention can break the chain. Attention is the disruptive force that allows something new to appear. It severs the tyranny of the past. It creates room for the unprecedented. He knew the stakes were high. Without the ability to control attention, the human animal is a captive of reflex. And yet, James never succumbed to pessimism. He believed the will could be trained, not in grand epiphanies, but through small, repeated acts. Just as muscles grow with resistance, so the power to focus strengthens with use. He illustrated this with examples from everyday life: soldiers in battle, students in study, artists at work. In each, the moment of choice returns. Shall I persist or yield? The temptation is always present to escape, to scroll, to postpone. But so is the alternative: to stay, to look again, to wrestle the attention back from drift. James's realism is bracing. He never promised mastery. He offered, instead, a philosophy of repetition. One must return to the same task, the same truth, the same self. And this return is not defeat. It is creation. There is something almost sacred in his insistence that attention builds reality. He wrote, "To say that a thing is to say that it is attended to. The neglected thing, idea, memory, person fades into non-being. This is not metaphorical. For James, reality is not a given. It is an event co-created by the perceiver. Thus, your focus is not trivial. It is ontological labor. And yet, how easy it is to forget this. How easily we let ourselves slide into the mode of reaction, letting external rhythms dictate our inner tempo. In such moments, James offers no condemnation, only a call. Wake up. Choose again. Begin again. This ethos, this patient defiance against dispersion is perhaps James's most enduring gift. He saw that attention is not the opposite of distraction. It is the transformation of distraction into direction. A kind of internal aikido. The same mind that wanders can be gathered. The same flood of impressions can be shaped into form. It begins with a single act. Look, not to escape, but to inhabit. Look not to confirm what you already know, but to discover what might be true. Look, and in that looking, become someone who looks. To read James is to confront your own wavering. Gaze and to take responsibility for it. You are not powerless. You are not condemned to scatter. The stream of consciousness can be redirected if you believe the effort is worth it. And so, once again the task returns. Will you attend? A woman walks alone through a forest trail. Her phone is off. There is no music, no voice, no goal. Just the rhythm of her steps, the sound of wind in the branches, the presence of things unnoticed. She is not meditating in the traditional sense, she is attending. She is practicing the discipline William James revered above all, attention without distraction, presence without dilution. James did not invent mindfulness, but his psychology is suffused with its spirit. He called for a life where the mind is not scattered like dust in the wind, but gathered like light through a lens. He believed that a person's capacity to live well depends on the quality of their inner engagement with the world. This is not a call to intensity, but to lucidity. The clearest life is not the loudest. It is the most attentive, and attention, for James, is never neutral. What you attend to, you care for. What you ignore, you allow to wither. This is true in relationships, in thought, in culture. He offered no shortcut through distraction. He saw modern life for what it was. Fragmented, overstimulated, brimming with seductive irrelevance, but he did not retreat into cynicism. Instead, he articulated a revolutionary claim. Focus is a form of freedom. To choose what to attend to is to resist the world's claim on your time and soul. It is to declare, silently, that not everything deserves your gaze. Not everything is worth your life. This is not arrogance. It is discernment. James taught that a cultivated mind is not one that knows everything. It is one that knows where to look. And for how long? In his lectures, he described attention as the gateway to every other virtue. Patience, courage, responsibility, all require attention as their soil. You cannot be brave if you are not focused. You cannot be kind if you are distracted. You cannot be yourself if you are dispersed. This is why James's view of attention cannot be reduced to productivity. It is not about doing more in less time. It is about becoming someone who is capable of presence, even in difficulty. And this, he believed, is the beginning of maturity. Consider the challenge of grief, or failure, or doubt. The easy path is to flee, to numb the mind, to drown sensation in stimulation. But James saw that healing, too, requires attention. The mind must be allowed to sit with its pain, not to indulge it, but to learn from it. To attend is to remain, to listen, to resist the urge to look away. He called this moral attention. It is not about concentration per se. It is about sustaining awareness where it is most needed, where it is most human. He wrote, "Effort of attention is the essential phenomenon of the will, not triumph, not certainty. Just the repeated choice to look again, And so we arrive at the heart of James's ethical psychology. To attend is to choose reality, and this is never a passive act. It is, in fact, the birth of self-authorship. Each moment of attention is a stroke in the painting of the self. Each act of focus, a declaration of what kind of life one is trying to build. This is not romantic idealism. It is existential realism. James acknowledged that we are tired, overwhelmed, easily pulled. But he also believed in our capacity to begin again, no matter how often we fail. Attention, like love, is renewed not in grand gestures but in small fidelities. You do not need to control everything. You only need to choose where to place your mind. You do not need to silence all noise. You only need to decide which voice deserves your listening. In the end, James left us with a challenge. If attention shapes reality, and if reality is the canvas on which your life unfolds, what are you choosing to see? He stood before his students, eyes quietly scanning the room. No theatrics, no showmanship. Just a man, a philosopher, a psychologist, speaking about the most intimate mechanism of human life, the will to focus. The deepest principle of human nature is the craving to be appreciated, he once said, but beneath that craving is something even more fundamental, the yearning to truly see and be seen through attention. For James, attention is not a solo performance. It is relational. We are not solitary minds observing a world of inert things. We are actors in a field of experience that includes other minds, other intentions, other lives. And when we focus, we do not only shape our own consciousness, we shape our interaction with the world. Attention becomes a bridge, not a wall. He explored this in his reflections on consciousness. It is not an isolated container. It is a flowing process, open to influence, charged with emotion, always selective. The act of attention, then, is not a spotlight on a stage, it is the tuning of a radio. The world hums with signals, and we, by our focus, determine which ones become real for us. And here is the paradox James loved. Attention is freedom, but it is also discipline. You must be free to choose, but you must also be strong enough to sustain that choice. Without discipline, freedom becomes noise. Without freedom, discipline becomes tyranny. The art of attention is the balance between these forces. This is why James did not reduce attention to a mental exercise. He called it a spiritual struggle. In a distracted culture, the ability to hold one's gaze on something meaningful is a form of resistance, a refusal to be governed by triviality. To attend is to say, this matters. And to say that, over and over, is to build a self with gravity. He told stories of soldiers, saints, students, those who trained their attention not for applause, but for integrity. He admired the one who could return to the same task, the same duty, even when no reward was visible. Because for James, focus is not measured in duration, but in sincerity. There is something sacred in sustained attention. James hinted at this when discussing mystical experiences. In the Varieties of Religious Experience, he described how moments of profound awareness, those that transform a person's sense of reality, often begin in acts of concentrated perception, a prayer, a vigil, a silent walk. These are not escapes. They are deep entries into presence. He did not believe that every moment should be sacred or that constant intensity is possible. He knew the mind needs rest, wandering, even distraction. But he also knew that too much dispersion weakens the soul. The art is in the return. Can you come back to the center? Can you remember what you had chosen to care about? This brings us to another crucial insight. Attention is memory in action. To focus is to hold something in the light long enough for it to become part of who you are. And this, for James, is how habit is formed not mechanically, but through chosen repetition. Focus creates grooves in the psyche. Over time, these grooves become pathways. And these pathways become the shape of the self. He wrote, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes." And what is an attitude, if not a sustained mode of attention? How you look shapes what you find. And what you find shapes who you become. So the stakes are not small. They are nothing less than existential. If you drift through life, letting others decide what you should notice, you surrender your agency. But if you take the risk of focus of choosing a task, a person, a project, a question, and returning to it day after day, you are performing an act of personal authorship. You are not just living. You are shaping the meaning of your life. And James, ever the pragmatist, would ask, what works? What deepens your sense of being alive? What focus makes you more human, more just, more awake? It is not about perfection. It is about direction. The will to attend is not a talent. It is a daily decision, one that is always available, no matter where you are or how many times you've strayed. And so, in the privacy of your next distraction, in the quiet drift of your next hesitation, remember this. You can return. There is a kind of silence that descends not in the absence of sound, but in the moment of deep focus. A silence that is inward, resolute, almost sacred. In that silence, choices are made not of what to do, but of who to be. This is the silence William James returned to throughout his work. Not the stillness of retreat, but the stillness that emerges when attention is anchored in something greater than impulse. He understood the human mind as a battlefield of tendencies. There is no singular self, no static I at the controls. Instead, there is a shifting maze, beliefs. What unites them, what brings form to the chaos, is attention. It is the act that selects from among possibilities, that declares, this, not that, here not there, and this act is not passive. It is not instinctive. It is chosen. In the Principles of Psychology, James described attention as the focalization, concentration of consciousness. It is how consciousness becomes intentional, how it acquires purpose, and how, in doing so, it becomes personal. He was deeply aware of the fragility of this process. The mind is easily captured. The world is filled with hooks, advertisements, anxieties, distractions. But James believed the soul has a compass, and that compass is the will. The will, he insisted, is most visible not in moments of high drama, but in the return to focus, in the refusal to be mastered by noise. He gave an example that remains haunting. In its simplicity, a student faced with a book, unable to keep the mind from drifting. Every few seconds, attention slips. But instead of giving up, the student pulls it back. Again and again. This, James claimed, is the work of the will. Not to suppress distraction by force, but to outlast it by fidelity. That student, anonymous and forgotten, becomes for James a moral figure. Someone who chooses effort over ease. Someone who practices freedom, not by rejecting the world, but by choosing how to engage it. And that is the essence of James's philosophy. Attention is the medium of freedom. It is how we live deliberately, how we resist being lived by external rhythms. It is the threshold between reaction and response. But attention is also how we love. This is perhaps James's most profound contribution, his insistence that attention is not cold. It is not a clinical narrowing. It is warmth, directed. He wrote, that attention is governed by interest. And what interests us is what we value, what we feel drawn to, what we love. To focus on something is to give it emotional weight, to allow it to shape us. In this way, every act of sustained attention is a confession. It reveals what matters to us, even if we do not yet understand why. And if we want to change our lives, James would say, we must first change what we attend to. This insight runs through his reflections on habit. Habits are not formed by force. They are shaped by the attention we give to certain actions again and again until they become second nature. The same is true of beliefs, of identities, of desires. What we attend to, we become dots of what happens. When attention is hijacked, when the mind is no longer sovereign but scattered, James feared this deeply. He saw that a culture without attention is a culture without depth, and a self without attention is a self without coherence. Yet he never gave up hope. He believed that attention can be recovered not in dramatic gestures, but in daily recommitment. Each moment of renewed focus is a moment of self-repair. It is easy to be cynical, easy to say that attention is gone, that focus is impossible. But James would ask, gone where? Impossible for whom? The will, he argued, is not an illusion, it is a practice. And that practice begins every time we decide to begin again. You don't need to defeat distraction. You only need to endure it until your attention becomes stronger than your impulses. This is not a technique. It is a philosophy of life. One in which attention is not a tool for success but a path to wholeness. A man sits in the back of a chapel. He is not religious. He has no dogma, but he is listening not to a sermon, but to something subtler. The sound of wood creaking, the echo of his own breath, the hush of stillness. In that moment, without ritual or belief, he becomes deeply attentive. William James would say, here, now, the soul is working. James was fascinated by the edges of experience, those moments that do not fit into our categories, yet seem to reveal something essential. He called them fringes of consciousness, and he believed that attention allows us to touch those fringes. The everyday mind rushes past them, but the attentive mind stops, listens, opens. This is why James insisted that attention is not just about mental clarity. It is about existential intimacy. It is the gateway through which the self encounters the real, not the abstract real, but the concrete, pulsing immediacy of life. What is in front of you right now is not just scenery. It is an opportunity to wake up. He observed that most people live reactively, sleepwalking through the day, driven by habit, by external demands, by inertia. But to pay attention, to really pay, is to become radically awake. Not hyperactive, but present. Not overwhelmed, but attuned. In the Varieties of Religious Experience, James described how the mystical is not found only in visions or ecstasies, but in the intensified presence that comes with focused awareness. He recounted how certain individuals, simply by attending deeply, began to feel the sacred in the ordinary. A tree, a face, a word. He did not claim these experiences prove a divine reality. He said they reveal the depths of our own. This is why for James, attention was never just psychological. It was spiritual. The act of directing one's mind deliberately becomes a form of inner prayer, a non-theistic devotion to the present, to the possible, to the real. And yet, attention is hard. It is not glamorous. It does not promise immediate reward. Often, it reveals pain. When we really look, we see what we've been avoiding. We feel what we've numbed. We face the dissonance between who we are and who we want to be. But this confrontation is not failure. It is the beginning of transformation. James called this the strenuous mood, a readiness to engage life on its own terms with all its ambiguity. To attend is to stop waiting for perfect conditions. It is to begin here, in the mess, in the tension. He was unsentimental about this. He knew that the mind resists. He wrote, "The effort to attend is the only effort of the will. Everything else, decision, action, belief, follows from it. Without attention, there is no center. Without a center, there is only drift. And yet, James never moralized. He didn't shame distraction. He illuminated it. He showed that the distracted mind is not bad, it is merely untrained. And training is possible. Not through force, but through gentleness. Through repetition. Through care. To focus, then, is not to clamp down on the world. It is to open to it more precisely. It is to say, I am here. I will stay. I will not flinch. Even when what we see is uncomfortable. Even when it demands change. And slowly, with each act of attention, a person begins to feel more alive, not because life has changed, but because perception has deepened. Meaning emerges not from new content, but from renewed presence. James believed that this is the core of personal power, not dominance over others, not mastery of tasks, but the ability to choose what one sees and to see it fully. In that act, the self is not fixed. It is renewed. This is not a metaphor. It is a discipline, one available to anyone, one that begins again each morning, each breath, each choice to return. He walks along a crowded street. Noise everywhere. Vendors shouting, sirens pulsing, faces rushing past, and yet, within him, a stillness. He is practicing something few can see, the act of choosing what not to notice. For William James, this is not avoidance, it is creation. The selective nature of attention is what makes consciousness possible. It is also what makes freedom possible. James wrote, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." In this single sentence lies a revolution. Experience is not given. It is constructed by what we allow in, by what we emphasize, by what we sustain in the field of awareness. Attention is not just a spotlight, it is a sculptor. It subtracts to reveal form. It eliminates to create coherence. In this light, attention becomes more than a capacity. It becomes a responsibility. Because every time you focus, you are saying yes to something and no to something else. Every act of attention is a moral act. It affirms some part of the world and excludes another. This is not a flaw. It is the structure of experience itself. James did not want us to eliminate distraction altogether. He knew that novelty, surprise, digression all have value. But without the power to return, to refocus, to choose what deserves centrality, the mind becomes a slave to interruption. There is no peace, no depth, no authorship. He offered no utopia of pure focus. Instead, he offered a pragmatic realism. Train attention like you would train a muscle. Begin small. Choose something to focus on not for its usefulness, but for its significance. A sentence, a gesture, a task, a silence. And return to it again and again, not because you must, but because you can. This is the will to attend. Not the will to dominate or to suppress, but the will to remain. James admired those who could sustain focus under pressure, not because they were heroic, but because they were human. They had learned to care, and that, ultimately, is the secret? Care. Attention follows interest, and interest follows value. If you cannot focus, the question is not, what is wrong with me? But what do I really value? Or more pointedly, what have I stopped valuing without realizing it? James would not answer these questions for you. He would say, experiment. Attend. Let your own focus reveal your priorities. Let it show you where your life is drifting and where it longs to return. In this sense, attention becomes diagnostic. It exposes not just our habits, but our hope. The very things we keep looking at despite failure, despite fatigue, those are the things we still believe in. They are the quiet hypotheses we are still willing to test. James's entire philosophy of pragmatism revolves around this testing. Truth for him is not a final answer, but a process of verification. An idea becomes true when it proves itself in experience. But that proof depends on attention. If we do not attend, we cannot test. If we do not test, we cannot know. So when we speak of focus, we are not speaking only of discipline. We are speaking of the condition of knowledge, of intimacy, of truth. To attend is to give an idea a chance, to give a person a chance, to give the self a chance, and this is why James's work remains urgent today. In a time where attention is monetized, distracted, fragmented, he calls us to reclaim it, not as efficiency, but as identity. Who you are is, in large part, what you consistently attend to. Your habits of focus are the architecture of your soul. To reclaim that attention is to reclaim authorship of your life. A single candle in a dark room. Its flame flickers, yet endures. Around it, shadows pulse and dance, but within its radius, there is clarity. This, for William James, is attention, a light in the darkness of flux. A fragile but real force capable of illuminating the path forward. He did not believe the mind was a unified machine. He saw it as a restless, plural field. Republic of tendencies, often at odds. And yet, through attention, this discordant field could become momentarily whole. Not permanently, not perfectly, but enough to allow action, decision, belief. In the will to believe, James made an audacious claim that we are justified in committing to certain beliefs before all evidence is in, if doing so opens a live possibility. He extended this principle to attention itself. To focus is to take a chance, to choose a path through the fog, to act as if meaning is there to be found. This means that attention is not only epistemological, it is existential. To attend is to vote with your life. It is to say, again and again, this is where I stand. This is what I will face. This is what I will give myself to. Even when it's uncertain. Especially then, and James knew that this choice is never final. It must be remade. The world pulls us away. Our own minds betray us. We forget. We falter. But in that failure lies the most Jamesian of truths. You can always begin again. This beginning is not dramatic. It is usually quiet, a decision to look up, to close one tab, to reread a line, to listen fully. These gestures, small as they seem, are how attention becomes real. Not in theory, but in practice. And through this practice, a person begins to change. Not overnight, not with fireworks, but deeply, quietly, by becoming someone who chooses their gaze, rather than renting it out. James asked us to take responsibility for this gaze, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. For the ability to attend is a privilege, a miracle of consciousness. And to waste it is not just to be inefficient, it is to live someone else's life. He left us with no rigid system, no commandments. Only a question: what kind of world are you helping to create by the way you pay attention? This is where your freedom lives. Not in what you possess, but in what you notice. Not in what you control, but in what you return to. Again and again. So before you move on, ask yourself, what is worth your sustained attention, not just today, but over a lifetime? If something in this journey through William James has moved you, consider leaving a like, not just as feedback, but as a signal of your continued presence here. Subscribe, not because it's expected, but because there is more to see, and your attention deserves a space where it is honored. And if you know someone, perhaps 3 people, whose life might be changed by learning to direct their gaze more deliberately, share this with them. Not to teach, but to invite, because attention, after all, is contagious. And when enough people begin to look with purpose, the world itself begins to change.